So to get started, let's just go over the agenda for today. We will be covering the following items. So we will do quick Xano team introductions. We'll dive into what makes Xano such a powerful tool for developers. We'll cover how Xano supports you from building your application all the way to scaling. And then we'll dive into a real-world example of what it looks like when an application needs to scale and the next steps to consider. At the end, we will wrap everything up by giving you an opportunity to ask any questions. You are also more than welcome to use the chat. Michael and I will be in there, as well as Chris. So if any questions come up throughout the session, feel free to drop them in there. Just a quick disclaimer, for those of you who have more advanced questions or specific questions about your projects, we highly recommend you joining office hours. That is held every Tuesday. And these sessions are the perfect opportunity for diving into more complex issues and discussing your individual projects in depth. So let's go ahead and hop over to team introductions. My name is Liz. I'm the Developer Community Manager here at Xano, and I will be your host for half of the session today. We also have Chris Coleman on the call and Michael Udinsky. So I'm going to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves. Chris, I will pass it over to you.
Cool. So yeah, my name's Chris. I am in Chicago, and I'm the head of customer success and community here at Xano. I'm super excited to be here and help everybody get some great info about how to scale their apps with Xano.
So thank you, Chris. And Michael, over to you.
Cool. Yeah, my name is Michael. I'm calling in today from San Diego, California. I'm the developer advocate lead here at Xano, and super pumped looking at this turnout. So keep the questions coming. I'll be in chat helping answer them, and excited for a great session.
Awesome. Thanks, Michael. Excited for a great session as well. So without further ado, let's go ahead and pivot to talking about what makes Xano such a powerful tool for developers. So first of all, Xano offers login and build capability, meaning that Xano manages server operations, allowing users to focus on building and scaling their applications without having to worry about server maintenance. Xano includes built-in security measures such as SSL encryption, which ensures data in transit is safe. Additionally, it provides robust user authentication and authorization capabilities to ensure that access is controlled and that data is secure. Developers can define and implement custom security rules and login within Xano, meaning that you can tailor the security measures to specific needs of your application. Xano also handles all of the backend maintenance and updates automatically, which basically ensures that the infrastructure is up to date with the latest security patches and performance improvements. With Xano, deploying a scalable and secure backend is super straightforward. We really want to enable builders to focus more on development and less on the intricacies of backend management. And Xano provides tools for managing different environments, right? Like development, staging, and production, which makes it easier to test new features thoroughly before going live. Now, let's dive into how Xano supports you throughout your entire development journey. We'll cover the main features that builders typically use in these stages. So starting out in the building stage, Xano can help developers and teams who are just starting out, whether you are focusing on prototyping or building an MVP. Some of the features in this stage includes database management, so that you can efficiently manage your data within Xano's robust database management system that is tailored for flexibility and scalability. API generation, meaning that APIs are automatically generated within Xano. This allows you to easily connect your front end and your back end. Also, users can implement complex business logic directly within Xano, making it easier to handle data operations and workflows. At this stage, we really want to empower builders to make fast pivots and apply changes based on feedback without a delay. This is really essential in the early stages of development. Once you are ready to launch, the key features are tailored to support your growth and ensure that a seamless transition is in place as you're introducing your product to a broader audience. So let's delve into some of the features here. Once you are in the launch stage, there are no record or rate limits. We understand that as your user base grows, so does your data. So we really want to remove these limits so that you can scale without worrying about hitting a cap. Background tasks that allow you to efficiently manage operations behind the scenes. Background tasks are actually given their own dedicated resources to ensure that they can continue to run uninterrupted over a period of time, regardless of whatever else is happening in your instance. Then there is branching and merging to facilitate smooth development workflows, ensuring that your team can collaborate effectively. Test data sources to validate your application's functionality and performance under various scenarios. Then JavaScript Lambda functions, providing you the flexibility to run JavaScript code in response to events if you want to tailor features and customize user experiences. Database triggers, which is something that the community was really excited about. Database triggers respond to changes in real time, which allow you to keep your data in sync and automate workflows. And then last but not least, security and compliance, ensuring that your application meets stringent security and privacy requirements. At this stage, applications are typically transitioning to a live environment where reliable performance and security measures are critical. So Xano supports developers in this stage by offering a higher number of API requests and enhanced data handling capabilities so that your application can handle your initial user growth and public releases. Now, as your application begins to gain traction and your user base expands, it becomes critical to scale your infrastructure to keep up with the increased demand. So let's take a look at some of the key features here. To handle more requests and complex queries efficiently, we boost the CPU resources available to your APIs and database to ensure quick response times even under heavy load. We introduce a load balancer to distribute incoming traffic across multiple servers to maximize speed and minimize the risk of overload. Then there is data caching via Redis to provide ultra-fast data retrieval and reduce the load on your database. And as you scale, maintaining compliance with regulations becomes more complex. Our compliance center simplifies that process, helping you adhere to legal standards and industry regulations. Private file storage, so you can securely store sensitive files to ensure that your data is protected and accessible only to authorized users. Role-based access control to manage your users' permissions and ensure that the right people have the right access. At this stage, you get unlimited creation and assignment of middleware on APIs, functions, or tasks that allow you to customize and enhance the capabilities of your applications. So in this scaling stage, as your application is experiencing rapid growth, the underlying infrastructure must scale efficiently to meet increasing demands without sacrificing performance. At this stage, we want to ensure that your application remains robust, responsive, and secure, no matter how quickly your user base is expanding. So I know it's one thing to kind of hear about all of these capabilities and quite another to see them in a real world example. So this brings us to a very exciting part of our session. Chris is going to take the stage to provide some great insights on critical indicators that an application needs scaling and how features that Xano offers can dramatically improve functionality and user experience. So Chris, I am going to stop sharing my screen and pass it over to you.
All right. So what I'm going to get into is essentially a real world example of when you should start to think about scaling with Xano as your backend. We originally wanted to do this as a live demo, but to make sure that we were getting good, like real world examples for this, there's a pretty big kind of time block that's required for that. It involves essentially running tests of user flows over a duration, which didn't really make sense for the sake of this presentation. Otherwise, we'd all be sitting there for about 45 minutes doing nothing and waiting for it to finish. So I think it made more sense for me to just kind of gather that data and put it into a slide deck for you. So I'm going to go over an app that I've built for this example. And then we're going to take a look at the backend side. We're going to take a look at what needing to scale looks like for the app that we've built. How can we improve some of the efficiency without having to change plans? And how do we make an informed decision about when it is time to move up to a higher tier plan? So the app that we've built is, it's a very simple kind of marketplace application. So users can register an account, and when they do so, they can choose their favorite products and stores that are closest to them. So after they've done this, they can browse by their favorite products, and they can immediately see if those products are in stock at their nearby stores, as well as other stores that they may want to go to that aren't as close to them. And they can, of course, begin to then start placing orders and submitting them as they find what they want. The thing to consider when you're thinking about scaling, we get a lot of questions that are kind of along the lines of, okay, well, I'm building, in this example, a marketplace app, simple e-commerce, right? What plan do I need to support this use case? And that question gets really tricky to answer because it is very much dependent on the specific things that you are doing and the specific features that you have implemented in your app to make it unique, to make it your own. For example, here, we have this page that shows the user's favorite products. This is the first thing they see when they log in. It also shows where those products are in stock at nearby stores and also at other stores. Even this very simple kind of data gathering API, this needs data from 3 different tables. It needs data transformation and manipulation and sorting and things like that. So there's actually a lot going on, and this is actually the API that we're going to look at. So when you're thinking about kind of your journey building an app using Xano, it is important to consider specific context about your app and kind of how intense it gets, as opposed to looking at a more broad use case example. So what does needing to scale actually look like? I want to go into a couple of features that we have available just as a primer, and then I'll show you how I used them to address scaling in this example app. So the first thing is a resource usage graph that shows compute usage broken down into separate sections. So your Xano instance has 5 separate sections, and they all have their own resources available to them, essentially so they don't get in the way of each other. You have your API compute, which is essentially just all of your business logic. Anything that you're doing in any of your APIs will be used by your API compute. We have database compute, which is reading and writing data to your database tables. And then we have our background tasks, Lambda functions, and finally, Redis caching, as Liz mentioned earlier. So these are all separated, and you can filter them when you're viewing your graph to kind of get a really good view on what's happening with each of those different pods. When you're reading your usage graph, we have some general guidelines to kind of go over. We do find that it can be a typical experience for someone who has their app deployed on Xano to not really worry about scaling or improving the efficiency of their application until things are breaking, basically, until they have too many users and they just can't support them anymore. And we kind of want to use this workshop to try to flip the narrative on that a little bit. So what our typical recommendation for this is, once you start to hit around 50% compute usage, it's probably time to assess what we can do to improve the efficiency of our app and make a determination on whether or not it's time to upgrade. And that's just because being at an average, 50% marker, it just gives you ample time to make an informed decision about what to do. You're not panicking trying to fix things when your users are complaining. The same thing applies to the 70% area. It just means that you might have less time to react. And then once you hit that 90 to 100% marker, that probably means that your app and your user experience is suffering. Requests could just be failing entirely, or they could just be very slow. So then the next question becomes, we can see in this graph here for our marketplace app, we're hitting anywhere from 40 to 80%. So we kind of want to take a look at that and see what we can do. What steps do we take inside of Xano to understand where we should put our focus? The filterable request history is really helpful for this, because the request history will allow us to look at the APIs that are taking the longest to deliver a response. And we can even dive down into each individual step of those APIs, and we can see which steps are taking the longest, so we know where to focus our attention. And that is what we did for this application. So what is actually going on in our marketplace app currently? Our app is live and we have a growing user base, and we are currently on the Xano launch plan. Our test they run about 20 minutes each. We did 2 tests before making improvements and after making improvements. In those tests, there were at least 5 users making requests at the exact same time. And, it's kind of difficult to consider how we talk about the usage in our application. So I want to kind of make a little bit of a clarification here. There is a difference between concurrent requests and, just like, other requests that happen in your application. Concurrent requests are requests that are being sent at the exact same time, like down to the millisecond. But, not everyone is going to be clicking on the same things at the exact same time, but we did want to at least account for that potentiality in this test. So that's what we did here. And when we were running these tests during peak times, we see between 40 to 80% on our API compute. Is that bad? Well, we know by understanding how to read our usage graph, it's not bad, but it does mean that it's time for us to maybe take a look and assess and see what we can do. Should we upgrade, and how do we know what path to take based on this information? So if we use that filterable request history, we can look and we can see this stores get all endpoint is taking around 4 seconds to return a response. And there were times during this test when our user load was at its highest that it was taking upwards of 8 seconds to return a response. So when we see that this API compute is spiking, we can see that these requests are taking longer. Sometimes they're failing, and our users are getting upset because they can't get to what they want as fast as they want to. So what can we actually do about that? How do we know if the answer is upgrade versus improve or make changes? Well, the first thing we would want to do is we would want to seek opportunities to improve efficiency in these long-running function stacks. And we can see in this example, and I'm going to get into a couple of specifics here on how I did this. This was the original function stack, and you can see it is several steps. I know the text is kind of small here, but we have 2 for each loops with nested loops inside of them. So that means we're taking pieces of data and we're iterating through them. And in those pieces of data that we're iterating through, there's another list that we also need to iterate through and transform and manipulate and sort that data. And it's just a lot for one function stack to do. If this is what you have to do to make it work, that's fine, but there are definitely ways that we can improve this process. And you can see, as a little bit of a spoiler, we took this whole function stack down to just 2 steps, which is a massive improvement and gave us, in a single run, a 95% increase in speed for this endpoint. So how did we actually do it? So we already kind of went through what this API does. It gets the user data. It gets the data for all of the stores that are nearby. It loops against those stores, looks at each of those products that are available at each of those stores, and loops against them to transform that data and make sure that the item stock is applied to that product object. So we know that that item is in stock and we can service it to the user. And then we do the same exact thing on stores that are not near the user, so we can populate those available at other stores options as well. So for a typical user who has 5 favorited products, we have around 250 steps per execution. And on a single run, it would take about a second. So that's with no application load or anything. It just took about a second to run when nothing else was happening, which is still pretty slow. On our fixed version, all we did is we retrieved the user data so we can look at their favorites in nearby stores, And in our database query, we used a combination of add-ons and joins to construct the data in a way that we need as part of the query itself. So that query all records step that actually gets data from our database, that can do everything that we were doing in our loops and in with our data manipulation all in one swing, which took our execution down to 2 steps and 0.04 seconds for a single run on average, which is a massive improvement. Now, there are, of course, areas outside of our APIs that we can take a look at as well. And one of the biggest ones there is database best practices for your large tables. Our user table is floating around 4,200 records right now, which really isn't a ton, but it's kind of getting to the point because our user base is growing that we want to start thinking about how we can use these tables more efficiently. So by using features like adding indexes to your tables, which is similar to like the index in the back of a book, and Xano will take care of all that for you. You just need to tell it to do so. Using add-ons, which allows us to take one query and enhance it with data from other tables, as in the joins are kind of the same concept there. We can make sure that those queries to these tables run at peak efficiency all the time. There are, of course, different adjustments that we can make to our APIs. Maybe we can't scale down the amount of functions that run. Maybe we need all of that to happen, and that's the only way we can make it happen. That's okay, because we have some other options to improve the response time as well. So we can take a look at response caching. So response caching will tell Xano, hey, I want you to run this API once and save the response, and then just return that saved response to anybody that calls this API in the future. And we can, of course, dictate when that saved response is updated. But the whole idea here is that Xano will just deliver those cached responses super fast and not run that function stack at all. And we can even kind of dial that down a little bit more using our data caching via Redis functions. Those will allow you to cache specific pieces of data, so those pieces of data are returned as fast as humanly possible, and we can continue to work with that data in the rest of our function stack. So an example like this would be when we're thinking about this marketplace app, what's changing all the time and what's not. The products are probably changing fairly often as our stores get in new products and remove old ones. Our orders, our user orders, as they add and remove things from their cart, those are probably changing pretty frequently. But what is the common denominator in all those? That's our stores, right? And we're probably not changing store data very often. Those stores aren't going to be moving or changing their phone numbers or anything like that in any sort of a rapid period of time, right? So we can cache that store data, so we never actually have to go back to that table until that data is updated. We can just use our data caching features to get that right away, and that saves us time, and that's in the data transformation, and that saves us time in actually getting the data from our database. Now, it's also important to think about what is your typical user experience like. You know, we're running an online store that doesn't typically involve super fast navigation from page to page, a lot of refreshing or anything like that. Our users are going to take a look at a whole list of products, and they're going to pick the ones that they want. They're going to click add to cart. They're going to keep scrolling and click add to cart again. So they're staying on the same page for a long period of time. So there are some things we can do, and this does fall a little bit more into the secure bucket. So we'll probably touch on this in some future sessions a little bit more, but rate limiting is a great thing to do for something like this. And that ensures that we don't have users that are being either, intentionally or unintentionally problematic by just spamming refreshes on our pages all the time. And we can rate limit those APIs to make sure that they don't get overloaded unnecessarily. So we could say, I only want this API to be able to be called every 5 seconds or 10 seconds or whatever makes sense for you. And that is a super easy implementation and a super easy win. So how do we know what steps to take for your own application? We already know how to look at the usage graph, and we know how to use that filterable request history. So where do we actually go for a step-by-step breakdown on how to make adjustments, what adjustments to make? We have extensive documentation that goes over a breakdown of each performance concerns and typical solutions for them. But you also want to build an understanding of the areas of improvement that make sense for your specific application. What feedback are your users providing? Are they coming to you and saying, hey, when I load my favorite products, it's super slow, and that happens all the time? Or what are you observing yourself in the request history? Because maybe your users aren't providing feedback to you. You need to make sure that you can have a pulse on the health of your application outside of that user feedback. So using that request history is a great first step. And you can use that to follow our in-depth guides regarding addressing those specific areas. And we are, of course, also available through Xano support 24 hours a day if you ever have any questions at all. So let's say after all of that, we've made as many improvements to our function stacks as we can. We've applied indexes to our database tables. We know we're using efficient queries, but our app is just growing to the point where we can't make any more improvements on the back end. We've done as much as we possibly can. Single run performance is improved, but under load, we still experience issues, those slowdowns, those failed requests. Our users are not having a good time. That means that it is going to be time to upgrade to a higher tier package. And the really good thing about upgrading is it's quick, painless, and self-serve right from your account settings. Usually only takes a minute or so to actually deploy that upgrade, and you would see an immediate improvement. And of course, we are available via support to answer any questions you have, to provide any guidance to help you pick the right package for you. And so with that, that is the real world example that I have for today. And I think I will hand it over to Liz for some Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chris. I hope that you all found that helpful. We will open it up. I know we have quite a bit of time left, so we can open it up for questions. Feel free to take yourselves off of mute if there is anything that you are curious about. Otherwise, you can drop your questions in the chat. And yeah, Michael, Chris, and I will hang out here and go over anything that you are curious about. Awesome. And
I love your guys' videos on YouTube. They've been super helpful, and it's fun seeing you guys in real life. So thanks for all those helpful videos.
Definitely always glad to hear that. We have a lot of fun making the videos, and it's always interesting to see how people are able to get some good benefit out of those. So thank you for that.
Awesome, Ian. And it does look like we have some questions in the chat, Chris and Michael. So I can read those and we can kind of handle them so that everybody can benefit from them. Let's see. The first one that I saw coming in is, can you quantify the large data table?
Sure. So what we would consider a large table, we throw out these numbers of around 10,000 records is when you need to start thinking about indexing. But I would also say that it does depend on the size of the table. There's a little bit of nuance there. A table that has 2 fields and they're just text is going to be a lot different than a table that has 100 fields. And maybe you should start thinking about indexing somewhere around the 5,000 record mark. Now, the really good thing is that it's very easy to tell when you need to apply indexing, which can really be just like a magic bullet for improving query performance on those tables. And the biggest tell for when you need to start using indexing is if you're running a custom query and that custom query is really slow, that probably means you need an index on those fields that you're querying. And as soon as you apply that, you'll see a drastic difference.
Thank you, Chris. Next question we have. I'm curious if choosing multiple Xano server locations for a global audience is in the works or available already.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one. I was actually just typing up a reply, but that's something that could be possible with our enterprise plans, but not something that probably likely would ever be offered with self-serve plans. So if that's of interest and of need, we can send you a form to chat with someone more about that. Just let us know. We can drop that in the chat.
Thanks, Michael. Let's see. Next question that we have here. What's the best strategy for updating a cached response to avoid users seeing old data?
Yeah, so when you're enabling those cached responses, you have a few options to determine when that cached response is updated. I want to say you can have it update based on the inputs. So if you have an API you could even just have like a dummy input for update cache and just send that a different value to update that cache response. I believe, and please, Michael or Liz, correct me if I'm wrong, but you can do that based on the authorized user as well. Okay. And you can also do it based on the data source. So you have, and you can also have it look at headers in the request as well. So you have a lot of flexibility in terms of when that cache response is updated.
Thanks, Chris. There was a question about being able to access a database of Xano coaches. And Michael did drop the link in there for our marketplace if anybody else is interested. Next question. And yeah, we're showing it on the screen here. Thanks, Chris. Next question is, I was trying to play around with Xano to learn it and couldn't figure out how to create a rich text file to use for blog, for example. So maybe the question is more about like creating rich text files.
Yeah, so I guess, I mean, the reason that you weren't able to find how to use rich text in our cells is because that's actually not something that's supported yet. And that's mainly because of the nature of a database. For example, you can almost think of it like a CSV file. It's very basic in the way that you can store data inside of it. A CSV isn't going to be able to store like text formatting. Now, that being said, it does kind of depend on the front end that you're using, but you do have the ability to store HTML in your database fields as well as Markdown. And those will be formatted for you just for easier readability inside of that database view. And so those are typically the options that you would lean on if you're serving like blog data with text formatting, would be either Markdown or HTML is what you would use.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. Next question is from Alex. Could you elaborate a little on the maximum number of requests per second that the different packages can handle?
So this kind of falls back into, making specific considerations for your use case. We've gone back and forth internally so much about how can we provide the most effective data for you to make an informed decision. And the thing is, at the end of the day, if we were to put up a table that says, this plan can handle this many requests per second, it would be completely irrelevant because whatever we build to test that is going to be completely different from what you're building. And so for questions like that, the typical recommendation would probably be to check out the Xano community and speak to other Xano builders directly. And if you can speak to somebody there that maybe has built a similar use case to what you're doing, you can kind of have a little bit of a more accurate barometer there. But unfortunately, it is kind of the impossible question just because of how much variability there can be between use cases.
Chris. Next question was about a specialized GPT loaded with extensive examples and documentation to assist users. And Michael did add a response on that. We do have an AI assistant in the product, and then also available in the community where you can ask questions on there. If you're looking for more so like JavaScript, ChatGPT is great with that. So you can combine them both to get the benefits. And then next up we have, could you give a brief preview of what will be discussed in part 2 of this series? Absolutely. I'm actually going to grab the link to that RSVP form, but in the second part, Greg, we're really going to be focusing on the security features that Xano provides. I think during this session, we really focused on scaling. So the next session is really going to be about how to keep everything secure and what Xano provides for you to do that. So let me just grab the RSVP form here, and I will drop it in the chat for anybody that is interested. If you haven't RSVP'd yet, that is happening next week. Awesome. Oh, and I think I should have maybe added it here in the questions. Let me try to find where we were at. Perfect. All right, next question. For business logic, if the program requires some ML libraries, how easy is it to install those libraries and or ML models in the backend?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So for any JavaScript libraries, to use with Lambdas. Right now, we need to whitelist those and make those available to use. So if there's any important, I would definitely recommend adding those feature requests in the community and getting some votes on those. We do eventually want to expand that to being able to install custom libraries. There's a lot of things to kind of consider and security implications that goes along with that. So no like current traction on that yet, but it is something on our radar. However, if you do have like, a model or some code sitting somewhere that you want to interact with your Xano backend, we do have the ability to sidecar Docker microservices. So that's hosted with your Xano instance, and you can directly interact with that in your Xano function stack. So microservices are a premium add-on on the self-serve plans. But that is definitely available if you do have a Docker image for those models or that code.
Thanks, Michael. Philip did ask a question in regards to using the Webflow CMS to host the blog portion of the site and Xano for everything else. Thank you, Glenn, for providing a response there. Next question from Rodrigo. Again, regarding the cache response and the example of the store that Chris showed, is there a way that if a new store is created, the API somehow knows that it has to query again if someone hits the API endpoint and not use anymore the cache data that considered known, the list of stores?
Mm-hmm. So for something like that, I would probably rely on the TTL, which is another parameter that you can set when setting up that response caching to essentially tell Xano when should I refresh the cache outside of those other parameters, like inputs changing or anything like that. So you can maybe have it set to like once a day or twice a day or something like that to have it update that cache, just to make sure your list of stores does stay up to date when it changes. And that is, of course, assuming that it doesn't change, super frequently, but you could adjust that time based on what would make the most sense for you.
Thanks, Chris. There was another question about plans for WebSocket support. It looks like we did provide some answers on there and a resource to our community feature request board. So feel free to check that out. Next question. You indicated that the different types of operations, database, API, Lambda, etc., have dedicated resources. Can you elaborate on this? Are there separate CPU resources for each type of operation, multiple servers? Or is there one resource pool that is shared with resource monitoring?
So I want to make sure that I don't give any inaccurate information here, because this feels like a question I wish I had Sean Montgomery to answer right now. But the way I understand it is you have one Xano server, but your server is split into different pods, and each of those pods have their own resources. And that is your API, your database, your Lambda, and your Redis. And so, the benefit of that, of course, is, for example, if you move some large data processing over to your background tasks, that's no longer going to affect those resources that are specifically dedicated for running your APIs, for example.
Thanks, Chris. And that is a great question, Bas. What we can do as well is grab this question and drop it in the community and provide any further information that we have on it. We'll tag you. I believe you're in our community already, so we can tag you in there. So that way, if there's anything that we would like to add, you can see it on there.
I would actually, regarding Sean's Airtable question, yes, you are correct. So in terms of the Airtable to Xano connection, it will import your data once, but after that, any maintenance would need to be built by you. But that being said, before we used to recommend background tasks for that, but you could absolutely use database triggers. So for example, when you update a record in Xano, it could immediately call an Airtable API to update that record on that side. That would be a really easy implementation for sure. And then as far as, just to keep ourselves honest here, as far as the things that Airtable can do that Xano can't, obviously they have, you can build like UIs on top of your Airtable data and stuff like that. Well, we're strictly focused on the back end. But I would say probably the biggest question that we get from people migrating from Airtable is about formula cells. which are not strictly supported in Xano, at least not yet. But that is probably something you could use triggers for as well. But typically all of that logic would live in a function stack as opposed to on, like a formula inside of a table cell.
Thank you, Chris. Is there a way to use Python code to interact with Xano data to do data analysis on our tables?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that kind of goes back a little bit to what I answered before right now with like microservices. However, there's been some loose talks about maybe one day supporting Python lambdas. I don't know if that's actually picking up any traction. Definitely kind of not tomorrow or anything, but right now I think the immediate answer would be microservice. Of course, you could always, have your Python code that's somewhere else ingest a Xano API and work with the data that way as well.
There are some items here asking if we can confirm or deny using minimal number of variables, not creating new variables, and a function stack makes processing faster. And then the second one, I feel Lambda's processing is faster versus function stack most of the time, but not always. Are there any things to keep in mind to understand the difference?
I can at least take the first part of that. And yes, I mean, in theory, creating less variables is always better because that's less steps in the function stack. And that's also probably less running memory that's being used by that execution as well, for sure.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. And then, the second one in regards to the Lambda's processing faster. I don't have any finalized data on this. Chris, Michael, is there anything that you would want to add on there?
Yeah, I mean, I think just from general observation, that feels generally correct. In the same way, I don't have like solid evidence, but Lambdas do have like sometimes some ability to do asynchronous processing as well, whereas the function stack processes everything linear. So that can definitely make things, but general observations, it does feel like Lambdas are a bit faster.
We do actually have there's a video coming up that gives performance differences between normal function stacks, Lambdas, and then using the Xano transform engine as well. So we can give you a little bit more insight on that. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel because that will be coming up very soon.
Next question, and I think this is something that is very highly requested. Can you create a status page for Xano that we can visit to check if we suspect any issues or at least know about downtimes?
Yeah, so the main problem with trying to build a Xano status page is it would be largely ineffective for most of the people that use Xano, and that's because your Xano instance, as long as you're on a paid plan, your instance, it's its own server. It's not touched by anything else as far as Xano is concerned. So it would be very difficult to provide like a status page that would reflect anything to do with your specific instance. That is, of course, why we provide things like the usage graph and the request history and stuff like that. Because if you are having problems, it's very likely that it is specific to your instance and not like a Xano-wide problem. It's actually I feel like it would be pretty rare if, I don't want to end up eating my words, but almost impossible for that to happen, at least for anybody that is on a paid plan. I should say that doesn't mean that we're not looking into a way to do it. It's just a little bit more complex than it sounds, unfortunately.
Are there any swag or gear for indie founders when we upgrade to the paid plans? Love this question. I feel like we all want more Xano swag, and there's definitely going to be more ways coming up where you can get your hands on some. So just at least my answer from my end would be to keep an eye in the community. And yeah, we have some fun surprises coming up. Awesome.
Next time I won't be flexing my Xano shirt on these.
Great. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. We really hope that you found this helpful. Really appreciate all of the questions as well, to keep this conversation going. If there is anything else that comes up, like I said, we don't just like go away after this. We are always in the community. Feel free to reach out to us there. And we have another question. Is there any built-in CDN for video streaming in Xano?
So this might be an outdated recommendation, but I think it is typically recommended to use a third party to host your videos and just store the URLs and any metadata that you need inside of Xano. But Michael or Liz, if you've seen anything newer, please correct me.
Yeah, I think that's generally spot on. Like we can, definitely store the videos on Xano, but I think you'll probably find it more useful using a third party. We do have function stack integrations with S3 buckets in Google Cloud Storage. So those might be low-hanging fruit answers for you if you have more intensive video streaming needs.
Awesome. And yeah, Tomas also added a answer in there as well, bunny.net. So thank you for that recommendation too. Thank you everybody for attending. We'll see everybody next week for the follow-up session. Yeah, feel free to reach out to us if any questions come up in the meantime. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.